Hey there, let me tell you about one of the most fascinating groups in history, the 12 disciples of Jesus. What's really interesting is that these guys weren't perfect. They made mistakes, had doubts, and struggled just like we do. But that's what makes their story so relatable and powerful. Among them, you had Peter, the impulsive one who later became a rock of faith, and John, known as the disciple Jesus loved. They learned, grew, and ultimately helped spread a message that would change the world forever. Pretty amazing how regular people can do remarkable things, right? So we'll look and dive into each one of story. Let me share their names with you. First, there were the fishermen brothers, Peter and Andrew. Then James and John, also brothers, known as the sons of thunder. Philip and Bartholomew were close friends, while Matthew was a former tax collector. Thomas, often called Doubting Thomas, was there too. Another James, son of Alphaeus, was chosen, along with Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot brought his passionate spirit to the group. And finally, there was Judas Iscariot, who would later betray Jesus. These 12 ordinary men were chosen to do extraordinary things, becoming the foundation of Christianity as we know it today. First, know who was Peter and Andrew, the first disciples of Jesus. You know, before they became these legendary figures we know today, they were just ordinary fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. It's a typical day by the shoreline, the sun beating down as Peter and Andrew cast their nets into the water. They've been doing this their whole lives, following in their father's footsteps. Peter, or Simon as he was known then, was the more outspoken of the two, known for his bold personality and sometimes impulsive nature. Andrew, on the other hand, was quieter, more thoughtful. But everything changed when Jesus walked by that shore. He saw these brothers doing what they'd always done and said something that would transform their lives forever. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Just imagine that moment. Two ordinary guys, covered in fish scales and sea spray, being called to something extraordinary. What's really interesting is how different their responses were. Andrew, who had actually been a follower of John the Baptist first, recognized Jesus as the Messiah immediately. He was so convinced that he rushed to tell Peter, "We have found the Messiah." Peter, though initially skeptical, would later become the rock upon which Jesus said he would build his church. You know what's remarkable? These weren't educated scholars or religious leaders. They were working-class men who spent their days hauling in fish nets. Yet Peter would go on to become one of the most important leaders of the early Christian church, while Andrew would travel far and wide, spreading Jesus' message throughout Greece and what is now modern-day Turkey. Their story really shows us something powerful, that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a simple choice to say yes when opportunity knocks. These two brothers left everything they knew, their business, their security, their entire way of life, to follow a calling they couldn't fully understand at the time. And in doing so, they helped change the world. Second, the fascinating story of James and John, two brothers who became some of Jesus' closest disciples. You might know them as the Sons of Thunder, a nickname Jesus himself gave them, and trust me, they lived up to it. Two young fishermen working on the Sea of Galilee with their father Zebedee, mending their nets on a typical day. Then Jesus walks by and simply says, "Follow me." Without hesitation, these brothers left everything, their family business, their security, their entire way of life, to follow this remarkable teacher. But here's what makes their story so relatable. James and John weren't perfect. They were actually quite human in their flaws. Remember when they asked Jesus if they could sit at his right and left hands in his kingdom? Talk about ambitious. Or that time they wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy a Samaritan village that rejected Jesus. Yeah, that's where the Sons of Thunder nickname really shows through. But what's truly remarkable is how they transformed. Under Jesus' guidance, these hot-headed brothers evolved from impulsive fishermen into pillars of the early Christian church. James became the first apostle to be martyred for his faith, showing incredible courage in the face of persecution. John, on the other hand, lived to be the oldest apostle, writing some of the most profound and loving passages in the New Testament. You know what I find most inspiring about their story? It shows us that Jesus doesn't expect us to be perfect when he calls us. James and John came with their flaws, their ambitions, and their tempers, but their willingness to follow and learn changed everything. They remind us that transformation is possible, that passionate people can channel their energy into something meaningful. Their legacy lives on today, not just in the pages of Scripture, but in the example they set, that ordinary people, with all their imperfections, can be part of an extraordinary purpose. That's something worth thinking about, isn't it? Next, let's explore the fascinating story of Philip, one of Jesus' 12 disciples. You might be surprised to learn that this humble man played a crucial role in spreading Christianity, yet many people know very little about him. Philip was from Bethsaida, the same town as Andrew and Peter, and was among the first disciples Jesus personally called. Imagine being there. In that moment, Jesus looks at you and simply says, "Follow me." That's exactly what happened to Philip, and without hesitation, he did. What makes Philip particularly interesting is his practical, down-to-earth approach to faith. Remember the story of feeding the 5,000? When Jesus asked Philip where they could buy bread for the crowd, Philip immediately started calculating the cost. He was the kind of person who needed to see things to believe them, something many of us can relate to today. But here's what's really captivating about Philip. He was a bridge builder. After meeting Jesus, the first thing he did was find his friend Nathanael. When Nathanael was skeptical, Philip didn't argue or preach. He simply said, "Come and see." Sometimes, the simplest invitations are the most powerful. Philip also played a crucial role in bringing Greeks to Jesus. During the Passover feast, when some Greeks wanted to meet Jesus, they approached Philip first. This shows how he was known for being approachable and open to outsiders, a quality that would prove essential in the early church's expansion. According to tradition, Philip went on to preach in Greece, Syria, and modern-day Turkey. He faced persecution but remained faithful to his mission until the end. His story reminds us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're driven by genuine faith and conviction. What's particularly inspiring about Philip is that he represents all of us, someone who had questions, who sometimes doubted, but who ultimately chose to believe and dedicate his life to something bigger than himself. His legacy continues to inspire millions, showing that faith isn't about having all the answers, but about being willing to take that first step and come and see. Bartholomew, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, a figure wrapped in fascinating mystery and profound faith. You know, it's interesting that we actually know him by two names, Bartholomew and Nathanael. When Philip first told him about Jesus, Bartholomew's reaction was pretty relatable. He skeptically asked, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Little did he know his life was about to change forever. The moment Jesus saw him, he said something remarkable. "Here is a true Israelite, in whom there is no deceit." Imagine someone looking right through you, knowing your character instantly. That's exactly what happened to Bartholomew, and it completely transformed him from a skeptic to one of Jesus' most devoted followers. What I find really amazing about Bartholomew's story is what happened after Jesus' resurrection. According to tradition, he became an incredibly brave missionary, traveling to places like India, Armenia, and Ethiopia. Think about that. A man who once doubted if anything good could come from Nazareth ended up crossing continents to share Jesus' message. There's this powerful legend about Bartholomew's final days in Armenia. Despite facing intense persecution, he never wavered in his faith. Some say he was martyred there, making the ultimate sacrifice for what he believed in. It's incredible to think how far he came from that first skeptical question under the fig tree. What really speaks to me about Bartholomew's story is how it shows that skepticism isn't the opposite of faith, sometimes it's the beginning of it. His journey from doubter to devoted disciple reminds us that authentic faith often starts with honest questions. His story isn't just ancient history, it's a powerful reminder that transformation is possible for anyone who remains open to truth, even if it comes from unexpected places. Let me take you on a journey back in time to meet one of the most fascinating figures in religious history, Matthew, the unlikely disciple of Jesus Christ. You might know him as the author of the first gospel, but there is so much more to his story. A man sits at his tax collector's booth in Capernaum, counting coins and keeping records. He's wealthy, but he's also despised. You see, in first century Judea, tax collectors were seen as traitors, working for the Roman Empire and often cheating their own people. This man was Matthew, also known as Levi. Then comes the moment that would change everything. Jesus, already drawing crowds and attention, walks past Matthew's booth. Instead of avoiding him like others do, Jesus stops. With two simple words, "Follow me," he invites this social outcast to become his disciple. What's remarkable is Matthew's response. The gospel tells us he immediately left everything, his wealthy position, his security, his entire way of life, to follow Jesus. Can you imagine making such a life-altering decision in an instant? But Matthew didn't just leave his old life behind. He threw a great feast for Jesus, inviting other tax collectors and sinners. It was his way of introducing his old world to his new purpose. This act perfectly captures who Matthew became, a bridge between the marginalized and the message of Christ. As a former tax collector, Matthew was skilled with numbers and record-keeping. These abilities served him well when he later wrote his gospel, providing detailed accounts and carefully organized teachings of Jesus. His gospel particularly emphasizes how Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecies, making it especially meaningful to Jewish readers. Perhaps what's most inspiring about Matthew's story is the complete transformation of his life. From a man who collected material wealth to one who collected and shared spiritual treasures. From someone avoided by society to a person who would write words that would be read by billions across centuries. Matthew's story reminds us that no one is beyond transformation, that our past doesn't define our future, and that sometimes the most unexpected people can become the most powerful messengers of hope and change. His life became a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of complete renewal. Today, 2,000 years later, his words continue to inspire and guide people across the globe, proving that when we answer the call to something greater than ourselves, our impact can echo through eternity. And one of the most fascinating figures among Jesus' disciples was Thomas. You probably know him as Doubting Thomas. But there's so much more to his story than just that one moment of skepticism. Let me tell you about this incredibly complex and relatable disciple. Thomas was actually a twin. His name Didymus literally means twin in Greek. Can you imagine being one of the 12 closest followers of Jesus, yet still carrying your own deep questions and uncertainties? That was Thomas's reality. You know, before that famous doubting incident, Thomas showed remarkable courage. When Jesus decided to go to Bethany where Lazarus had died, a dangerous journey since people there wanted to kill him, it was Thomas who said to the other disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." This wasn't a doubter's response, this was pure loyalty and bravery. But then came that pivotal moment after Jesus' resurrection. While the other disciples claimed they had seen the risen Lord, Thomas wasn't there. And his response, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Pretty bold statement, right? Here's what makes Thomas so relatable. He wanted tangible proof. In a world of extraordinary claims, he dared to ask for evidence. And you know what? Jesus didn't condemn him for it. When Jesus appeared again, he specifically invited Thomas to touch his wounds. "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." This moment transformed Thomas. According to tradition, he went on to become one of the most dedicated missionaries, traveling as far as India to spread the gospel. Ancient churches in India still trace their origins to Thomas's ministry. Imagine that, the same person who once doubted became so convinced that he traveled thousands of miles to share his faith. What I find most beautiful about Thomas's story is how it speaks to our own journey with faith. His story tells us it's okay to question, to seek understanding, to want more than just second-hand accounts. Jesus met Thomas exactly where he was, with all his doubts and questions, and turned him into one of the most convinced and convincing apostles. So next time you hear someone say Doubting Thomas, remember, this was a man who showed us that doubt isn't the opposite of faith. Sometimes it's the pathway to an even stronger conviction. Then James, most mysterious apostles James, the son of Alphaeus, often called James the Less to distinguish him from the more well-known James, brother of John. This apostle's story is like a whispered secret through time. Picture yourself in 1st century Judea. Among Jesus' 12 chosen disciples, there walked a man whose dedication would help shape the foundation of Christianity, yet whose personal story remains largely untold. James, son of Alphaeus, is mentioned in all four Gospels lists of apostles, but beyond that, he's like a shadow in the biblical narrative. Some historians believe he might have been a cousin of Jesus, while others suggest he earned the nickname the Less either due to his shorter stature or because he was younger than James, the brother of John. But don't let this lack of detailed information fool you. His selection as one of the 12 speaks volumes about his character and faith. What's truly remarkable is how James, despite his limited presence in biblical texts, represents something profound about faith itself. Sometimes, the quietest servants make the most significant impact. He wasn't known for grand speeches or dramatic moments. but his steady presence and unwavering commitment to Jesus' message helped spread Christianity across the ancient world. According to tradition, James would later become a powerful voice in spreading the gospel, possibly traveling as far as Egypt to share Jesus' teachings. Some accounts suggest he met a martyr's death, showing the same courage and conviction that characterized all the apostles who gave their lives for their beliefs. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voices and biggest personalities, James, son of Alphaeus, reminds us that true greatness doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it's the quiet, consistent faith that leaves the most lasting legacy. Thaddeus, you might not hear about him as much as Peter or John, but his story is absolutely fascinating. Also known as Judas but not Judas Iscariot, Thaddeus' name actually means courageous heart, and boy, did he live up to it. Picture this, a man so devoted to his faith that he traveled to the most dangerous corners of the ancient world to spread Jesus' message. There's this incredible tradition that says Thaddeus journeyed all the way to Armenia after Jesus' death. Now, imagine being one of the first to bring Christianity to an entirely new region. That's exactly what he did. The Armenian people actually consider him one of their first evangelists, along with Bartholomew. But here's where it gets really interesting. While many of us might hesitate to speak up about our beliefs, Thaddeus was known for his boldness. He wasn't just quietly spreading the word, he was healing the sick, performing miracles, and standing up to powerful leaders who opposed his message. You know what's really touching about Thaddeus' story? Despite being one of the less mentioned disciples in the Bible, his impact was enormous. He reminds us that you don't need to be in the spotlight to make a difference. Sometimes, the quietest people leave the loudest legacies. According to tradition, Thaddeus eventually became a martyr for his faith. Think about that level of commitment, being willing to die for what you believe in. While we might not face those exact challenges today, his courage still inspires people to stand up for their convictions. What I find most remarkable about Thaddeus is how he shows us that every person matters in the bigger picture. He wasn't the most famous disciple, but his dedication helped shape the early Christian church in ways that still influence millions of people today. So next time you feel like you're not important enough or your contributions don't matter, remember Thaddeus. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from the people who aren't in the headlines, but who simply show up each day with courage and conviction. Simon the Zealot, one of Jesus' 12 apostles who often flies under the radar, but whose background tells an incredible tale of transformation. Before joining Jesus, Simon belonged to a group called the Zealots, passionate Jewish nationalists who fiercely opposed Roman rule. These weren't just peaceful protesters, they were known for their radical actions and sometimes violent resistance against Roman occupation. Imagine the intensity of someone willing to risk everything for their political and religious beliefs. What's truly remarkable is how Simon's life took a complete 180-degree turn. Here was a man who once believed in forceful revolution, now walking alongside Jesus, who taught about loving your enemies and turning the other cheek. Think about that contrast for a moment. It's like a hardcore political activist suddenly becoming a peace ambassador. The gospel writers don't give us many specific details about Simon's personal journey, but that very mystery makes his story even more intriguing. What conversations did he have with Jesus? How did he reconcile his zealous past with his new path? While we may not know these details, we do know he remained faithful to Jesus' teachings until the end. According to church tradition, Simon went on to become a missionary, spreading the gospel far and wide. Some accounts say he preached in Egypt, others in Persia, and some even suggest he made it as far as Britain. While we can't verify all these claims, they paint a picture of a man whose passion for revolution was transformed into a passion for spreading a message of love and redemption. Simon's story reminds us that radical change is possible, that our past doesn't define our future, and that the most unexpected people can become powerful agents of peace. His life stands as a testament to how meeting Jesus can completely transform someone's worldview and purpose. Lastly, most complex and controversial figures, Judas Iscariot. You know, it's interesting how one name can carry so much weight, so much meaning across centuries. Judas was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, handpicked to be part of the inner circle. Imagine being chosen as one of just 12 people to follow someone you believed would change the world. He wasn't just any follower, he was the group's treasurer, trusted with handling their money. But here's where things get really interesting. Despite being so close to Jesus, sharing meals with him, witnessing miracles, and being part of this incredible journey, Judas became the one who would ultimately betray Jesus. For 30 pieces of silver, a about 4 months' wages back then. He identified Jesus to the authorities with a kiss. You might wonder, what drives someone to betray a person they have followed so closely? Was it greed, disappointment? Some historians suggest Judas might have been disillusioned, expecting Jesus to lead a political revolution against Rome, not understanding the spiritual nature of Jesus' mission. The aftermath of his actions is equally compelling. When Judas realized the consequences of his betrayal, he was consumed by such overwhelming guilt that he returned the money and, according to biblical accounts, took his own life. It's a tragic end to a complex story that raises deep questions about loyalty, redemption, and human nature. Today, Judas's story serves as a powerful reminder about the choices we make and their consequences. His name has become synonymous with betrayal, but his story is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a profound exploration of human weakness, regret, and the price of disloyalty. It makes you think, how well do we really know those closest to us? And more importantly, how well do we know ourselves and what we're capable of under pressure? Each one was unique, with their own story and journey, but together they helped spread Jesus' message across the world. Pretty amazing how 12 ordinary guys ended up changing history forever, right? I hope you find the detailed information about each disciple helpful. Please subscribe for more videos, and feel free to comment below with suggestions for future Bible studies.